Amen. Okay, so thank you for being here for the second presentation. Uh, we will continue where we left off, and I will quickly make a review of 3 points only. I know we're ready. Oh, sorry, I haven't selected my translator. That's why I'm not listening to her. Sorry. Just a second. Okay. Can you speak again? See if I hear you. Hello? You hear me now? Sorry. I'm with French. Sorry. Okay. My bad. I should have said it too. Okay, so let's review 3 points quickly. I want to review specifically the 3 witnesses that I gave for the timing of shipwreck or Sunday law. I, I said that the way I see it, Acts 27 is suggesting that it's 2025. So let me just try to emphasize what are those 3 witnesses that I saw, that I see. So the first witness, I would say it's a combination of verse 27 and 28. So I will just read these 2 verses again. But when the 14th night was come, and we were driven up and down in Adria, about midnight, the shipment deemed that they drew near some country, and sounded and found it 20 fathoms. And when they had gone a little further, they sounded again and found it 15 fathoms. My suggestion is that we have clearly an element of time in these 2 verses. And it is not simply based on the number 2520, which is actually there. We saw it with Elder Tess. I'm saying that the fact that the people of the ship were able to say we're close to island, we are near to some land, understanding land to be the end of the ship. I wanted to suggest that we need to find the institution calculating time. And obviously, the US institution cannot calculate time the way we do. With prophetic patterns and the Bible. They calculate time through the election cycle or a presidency term. So the way I see it is that we need to see the United States calculating time in that way. I could give several examples, but I just gave one from Hillary Clinton, that even she's not part of the institution right now, it's a good representation of the mindset of many people within the institution from both parties. She was asked, what would happen if Trump comes back again? She said, it would be the end of our democracy, quote unquote. The question is, how is she, and I would argue the institution, so sure that if Trump comes back, it's the end? Why is, sorry, why is Acts 27 emphasizing that this happens in 2021 and no another specific year? I would say that it's because of the unprecedented events that happened in January, which is actually a work that started in November with the election, when Trump said he won the election without any evidence or proof. So him and his team fought for over 2 months up until January. And it's in January 6th when they did their last and ultimate attempt to take the country by force. And so this is what I understand to be the rocks of verse 29 that we will read later. So when it says in verse 27, they deemed that they drew near some country, it has to be that the institution knows our end is very close. So that is my first witness for 2025. Because if you calculate that they are standing in January 2021, and they're calculating when are we going to lose our democracy, which is basically saying, when are we going to face this threat again that we just survived? I would say January 2025. So then we have the fathoms. And I suggested that it is a symbolic representation of the speed of the ship. So that would mean that the ship was here in 2021, and we're going to say that they symbolically are determining how far it's shipwreck. I said that they calculated the first sounding was 20 fathoms. And the second returned 15. And the difference between 20 to 15 is that they they approached the island by 5 fathoms closer. Then we take the number 5, which is the rate of or the velocity of the ship. and and I find that 5 fathoms in inches is 360. So I hope we can see that every 5 fathoms that the ship will symbolically approach the island, it's it's basically just a year, and that's how we arrived to 2025. But now, when we go to verse 30, no, 29, sorry. So when we go to verse 29, we can find the third witness for the timing. So it says, then fearing lest we should have fallen upon the rocks, they cast 4 anchors out of the stern, which is the back of the ship, and wished for the day. So what we have is that they almost crashed with the rocks, which is represented by the events of January 6th. They almost crashed the country. We now need to find what is the 4 anchors that stopped the ship from crashing in 2021. And as I already defended, I believe it is a democratic president that comes right before the actual shipwreck. And the logic is simple. Those anchors were dropped in January. When we jump to verse 40, as I showed you later, I told you that 41 is Sunday law. In order to go to Sunday law, 40 says, and when they had taken up the anchors. So you can go read in your own time. Those anchors are these ones. My my understanding is that those anchors are going to be in place until the end of the presidential term, which we know would be in January of 2025. So it is my personal opinion based on my interpretation of Acts 27 that the institution of the United States as of today is still anchored. It hasn't reached the island yet. So that would be just my suggestion. So now we left off with verse 30. And verse 30, I already defended. I'm not going to go over that again. That it does not take place in the year 2021. It's part of a different portion of the story. Is the period when they were waiting for daylight. I'm sorry, verse 29 is when they're waiting for daylight. And in 30, as we read with Ellen White as well, is when the break of day begun, the first lights of the day. And that's the moment when the sailors are going to try to flee the ship. And I contrasted how different they are from before when they were accomplishing all the duties. And then I spoke about, well, what can be the phrase cast anchors, which is right here. Because it is also mentioned in 29. The only difference is that ones are cast and the others are not. So I propose that, sorry, I propose that casting anchors means to certify a president, which is what happened in the following day, the 7th, early in the morning. It was supposed to happen the 6th, but because of the breach of the Capitol, they couldn't. So I want to remind us all, 30 is not yet shipwreck. I already said it, that is 41. But they're going to take decisions in verse 30 that are going to, yes, go ahead, that are going to make impossible not to crash with the island. Yeah, that's what I want to say. Inevitable. It's going to be inevitable to crash with the island. I'm going to explain that later. So if we understand that verse 30 means the certification, I would say that, well, it's actually already set up. It's going to be January 6th, 2025. And why do we see the anchors? Let's go back a little. The first set of anchors are mentioned in 2021, no, 2020, as I said. And that is because casting of the anchors is not the election when you elect a president. That's what the people do. They elect presidents. But the people are not in the ship. This is the institution. It is the work of the sailors to cast the anchors, which I want to suggest is Congress. So Congress would be what the Bible calls as the shipment. So what I see in verse 30 is that we're going to get to January 6th, the certification day. And the reason why anchors are mentioned, it's because she won the election. The anchors are mentioned in verse 30 because she is the one that wins the election. She's supposed to be certified. Those anchors will never be cast according to verse 30. So they, instead of casting the anchors, they cast the boat. And I want to talk about a little bit about the boat. I won't be able to talk about every detail of the boat, but I want us to be mindful that the boat is an important element of this parable. So if you could come with me to Acts 27:14. I will read from 14 to 17. And it says, not long after there arose against it a tempestuous wind called Euroclydon. And when the ship was caught and could not bear up into the wind, we let her drive. And running under a certain island which is called Claudia, we had much work to come by the boat, which when they had taken up, they used helps, undergirding the ship, and fearing lest they should have fall into the quicksands, strake sail, and so were driven. So here we see that they this ship has actually crashed almost 2 times. We understand the Euroclydon to be 9/11. We know this to be a great challenge against the institution. And well, they took several measurements in order to several measures in order to survive this storm. I want us to look at 16. At the end, it says, we had much work to come by the boat. This means that they need the boat in. Yes, they needed to come by the boat. They needed to save it, essentially. So I want us to read a quote of Ellen White regarding this moment in history. Let me see if I find the quote. I don't think I actually have it. I will paraphrase. She says, and this is her word, she says, their first work after the Euroclydon hit was to come by the boat, to take it. And she said that the boat was so important because it would be their last hope if something was to happen to the ship. So I want us to think of how important it is, the boat, for the institution. But they're going to lose it in verse 30. No, 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 actually, well, in verse 30, they let down the boat because they wanted to flee. But when we read the following two verses, we know that it says they lost the boat eventually. Paul said to the centurion and to the soldiers, except these abide in the ship, ye cannot be saved. Then the soldiers cut off the ropes of the boat and let her fall off. So we see here interaction between Paul and the soldiers. And this end up with the ship losing that important boat. So I wanted to think of the implications of losing the boat based on this chapter. So I want us to read verse 41 to 43. Um, this is the moment right after shipwreck. Well, in fact, 41 is shipwreck. Let's look at what happens in verse 42 and 43. It says, and the soldiers' counsel was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim out and escape. But the centurion, willing to save Paul, kept them from their purpose and commanded that they which could swim should cast themselves first into the sea and get to land. So when I look at this verse, I think of how inconvenient it was for them to lose the boat. Ships are not supposed to be ran aground to the beach, to crash with islands. Of course, out of desperation, and the only thing they could do was to crash. But what could have happened if the events of verse 30 didn't happen? What if the shipmen would have never tried to flee and never cast the boat out of the ship? Then the soldiers, whoever they represent, they wouldn't have cut the ropes. Therefore, verse 41, 42, and 43 would have been more like the following. Actually, reading verse 40. And when they had taken up the anchors, they committed themselves unto the sea and loosed the rudder bands and hoised up the mainsail to the wind and made toward shore. The ship would have stopped at a certain distance from the island. They would have used the boat as they would usually do. And everyone could have, come out of the ship onto the island safely. But verse 30 sentenced the ship to crash because they let down the boat. So I'm saying that January 6th is going to be the ultimate moment in time or the decisions to either crash or not are going to take place. Okay. Um, I want to read a specific quote. Let me just find it. Actually, let's leave this for later, and I will go on and try to show a second witness for Kamala Harris winning the election. As I was considering this verse through this year, I've been thinking that it's very easy to at some point, just interpret whatever we want. And there's a presentation from Lily Won some months back. She reminded us about how interpreting is not only a science but also an art. So what I'm trying to say is that I know these verses may seem to be flexible. We can go to different conclusions. I decided to went on and try to find a second witness in the structure itself. And so I basically, I'm sorry, I'm actually going to show another line before I show this testimony, just quickly. So I'm going to keep this here. Here's where we're going to give a second witness for Kamala winning the election, but not being certified. I want us to look at another ship in Acts 28. This ship was explained in greater detail in a presentation from Elena uh, in the past international campaign. So I would refer you to that in order to have a more thorough understanding of this line. This is on the top we have the ship of Adramyttia, then the ship of Alexandria, and I want us to consider that there's a third ship in verse 28. Chapter 28, sorry. And we're going to read the three verses. It's 28, 11 to 13. It says, and after 3 months, we departed in a ship of Alexandria, which had wintered in the isle, whose sign was Castor and Pollux. And landing at Syracuse, we tarried 3 days. And from thence we fetched a compass, and came to Rhegium. And after 1 day, the south wind blew, and we came the next day to Puteoli. So the symbol of Alexandria we already know, and we have been applying it to 1798. The start of the journey. So we're going to make No, this second ship from Alexandria to start from the same place. Then we arrived to, I mean, the ship arrives to Malta. In Malta is where Paul and the rest of the people are going to come into that ship. So they will board the ship in Malta. Malta is where the shipwreck took place, which is right here. I'm not reading all the verses. You can go on your time to read the context. Malta is where Paul spent the winter. But also the ship spent the winter in Malta. There's a distinction between the ship of Alexandria and the previous one. The previous one is called by Ellen White good ship. But if you read verse 11, this ship had a sign, Castor and Pollux. So this is the ship of Castor and Pollux. The word Malta means honey, which is a clear reference to us for the unsealing of the book of Daniel. When we are supposed to eat it. But we know this is a reference to the time of the end. So Malta, it's 1989. Just like Elder Tess took Myra and Lycia from the first ship right here on the top. And she transferred that symbol to 1844. Forgot to put the years here, 1863. We're also, I'm suggesting we can transfer Malta, which was the shipwreck, to 1989. Verse 12 says that landing at Syracuse, we tarry 3 days. When you have time to check your notes, you would note that Sidon means tarry, to tarry. Symbol of the tarrying time. Here it's where they also tarry. So we can safely say says that this is 2001. Then they arrived to Regium. Here, the meaning of Regium, if you check your Strong's Concordance, means to breach, means breach. And I will stop with this line here. More details, as I said, are in Elena's presentation. Because I just want to emphasize the word breach. So this word, it's what was in the headlines of every newspaper in English when the Capitol attack happened. Because they breached into the Capitol. The Capitol was breached. So this is just to confirm that there's an emphasis made by this parable, the parable of the sheep, to the events of January 2021. Now, I said that I wanted to show a second witness for Kamala winning the election but not being certified. Just wanted to remind you all that this conclusion, I'm basing it in based on verse 30. Okay. So now let's go to, everything got moved, sorry. So now let's go to this witness. I want to draw a line based on Acts 27 now. I want to take the dispensation that has to do with us, which in the Ship of Adramyttian are these four waymarks. So it's the line from 1989 to Sunday law. And if we place these waymarks, they would look like this. So we have 1989, 2001, 2021, and I'm suggesting 2025. So we have this. Sorry. It, so I want us to think of what share in common these four waymarks. And one of the first things that I notice is that they are all years after an election. I don't know if we can call it a transitional year. This is where the election of 88 happened, the election of 2000, and 2020 and 2024. So I would like to say that all of these waymarks are preceded by an election. If you notice in the Ship of Alexandria, this waymark is Lasea. In a port called Fair Havens. So Fair Havens will be a good place. Paul even warned them not to continue. So I would suggest that we won't see any issues here in 1989. So another thing that we can notice about this four waymarks is that they're all elections, or they're all years after an elections where a vice president run. So there's a vice president in each of the elections. You can go check on your own time. It doesn't happen always. A second thing that I noticed is that the election of 1989, the vice president won the election. And if you go to 2020, the vice president also won an election. But when we look at 2001, we see a weird election. There's issues with this election. America was terribly divided throughout the year 2001. I cannot go to the details, but I will ask you to review this election. But in summary, in this election, the American people didn't actually choose their president. I'm not talking about the electoral count. When we go to 2016, Donald Trump won the election fair and square. He lost the popular vote, but that's not how the system works. Yet in 2001, Al Gore was projected to win Florida. And something that in America is called the Associated Press, they declare him winner. But a little later, they had to roll back and say that actually Bush won the election. There was an issue with the state of Florida. Bottom line, Bush won Florida by 1,000 votes. Of course, I'm rounding this number. It's about 900 something. The Supreme Court of Florida accepted Al Gore's petition to make a recount. And as the counting was going on, the votes from 1,000 dropped to 500. There seemed to be many issues regarding the way the votes were counted. Al Gore was approaching Bush every day. The recounting was taking too long. And the conservative Supreme Court of the year 2000 decided that they needed to stop the recounting. And basically, no one could ever know for certain who won the election of Florida. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she dissented to that decision. Al Gore himself, he said, I disagree with the court, but I will obey. So we know that it was a very contested election. I will refer you to many papers that were written afterwards. It was discovered that especially Black people were disfranchised in that election in Florida. It is in Ruth Bader Ginsburg dissent. Every Black representative in Congress, they also fought back to that decision. But my prophetic legitimacy to say that Al Gore actually won this election . it's I want to give this testimony about Michael Moore. I hope we remember Michael Moore is this person who basically launched two very prophetic documentaries. Those documentaries have been placed on a line by Elder Tess back in 2020 in Uganda, I believe. And in Fahrenheit 9/11, launched in 2004, Michael Moore makes the case that Al Gore was basically stolen the election by the system. And then he plays a clip from January 6, 2001. Because in January 6, Congress can overturn an election. They really can. And Black women in particular, I refer you back to the documentary, they stood up and they tried to object the certification of Florida. But no senator wanted to sign the objection with them. It was primarily Black people and Black voters who were um, attacked by this decision of the court. So my point is, the year 2001 was won by Al Gore, but he was not certified in January 6. And the emphasis of that story, it's easy to see reading papers and watching documentaries. It was about racism. So I want now to show or to give a plausible conclusion of the year 2025. I think we know that this is going to be an election where the power of the vote of women are going to be clearly visible. Because they are the ones that have been suffering the most from the decisions taken both by Trump and the court in the past years. It is projected that women are going to vote and turn out like never before this election. But when we arrive to January 6th again, so allow me to say that all of these waymarks are about a certification. For Havens, the first waymark, it's a good certification. There's no issues there. The certification of the year 2001 was a really messy certification, and they should have, let's say, stopped Bush from becoming president. Al Gore should have been certified as president, but he wasn't. So Then we arrived to 2021, the certification of, I put Bush, I'm sorry, I should have said Biden, Vice President Obama. And even though this certification was probably one of the most difficult ones, the decision was correct and the right president was certified. It was wrong in 2001, and I would say that they will get it wrong again in 2025, when Kamala should be certified. And the issue right now at this moment is not going to be racism specifically. It's going to be, yeah, it's going to be gender. Um, so this is basically the second witness that we will see Kamala winning, just like Al Gore did, but she wouldn't be certified. And what else can we say? How can we be sure about this? We know about the year 2001 being the harbinger of the close of probation. Well, we need to remember that the close of probation is in Daniel 12:1, but this is also the close of probation of the sheep. So I think we can expect to see the fulfillment of the harbinger of 2001 in 2025. In 2001, we have the the US institution committing essentially a terrible crime. So we will call this a sin. And they were punished by this sin prophetically by the attack of jihadist Islam. I I can see evidence that if Kamala it's robbed the election by the system, I wouldn't be surprised that they would see also Islam reappearing in that year as well. So this is the pattern, a pattern that I wanted to show regarding the the five waymarks. So it should be radical Islam. I want to now read I want to read two quotes. We could read many quotes. I think there's many newspapers now, warning about the possibility of Trump taking the election unfairly. For translators, I'm going to read in quote 29, the loser triad. So this is Timothy Snyder, a known historian in America and in the world as well. And he has this piece that says the loser triad. And he says the following. I will read, yeah, we'll read to such a point, then I stop. So it says, we have seen this show before. We know what Trump losing looks like. Three Trumpian actions are predictable. We know them from the last election. You can go. Last time around, when Trump knew that he lost, one, he claimed that he won. Two, filed lawsuits. Three, encourage violence. And then he basically puts where he expects how's the timing of this. When he claimed that he won, he did it in November. Timothy Snyder expects this to happen also in November. The filed lawsuits, he expects them in November through December. And the violence took place in January. Sorry, this is not actually what he expects. He is laying out the pattern of last time. November, he claimed he won. November and December, he filed lawsuits. And it was in January when he encouraged violence. He continues and says, he did these three things because he lost. They comprise the loser triad. Judging from the past behavior through a repetition of the loser triad would signal that Trump believes that he has lost. In 2024, though, the sequence will be different. Allies of Trump have already filed dozens of lawsuits. Pro Trump violence is likely to begin around election day rather than in January, but the timing of Trump's claiming victory will be likely the same, shortly after election, but before the outcome has been confirmed. So this is a triad of 2020 and 2021, and he expects to see something similar, but in a different order in 2024, 2025. And he says, this, as I said, this time around, the three actions will likely come in the following sequence. Trump, 2024 lucid triad will be, yeah, go ahead. Number one, file lawsuits. already happened even before election. This is real. He's already filing lawsuits. He now expects the violence come on number two. He says around election day, most likely, and then claims that he won shortly after election day. If Trump again claims too early that he won, this is not just a statement like any other. It is part of a plan to take power by a candidate who believes that he has lost an election, a repeat of a behavior that we know very well. If Trump claims victory, this is a good sign that Harris has won the election. Now we're going to read short paragraphs from another article, also from Timothy Snyder. The first one that we just read is called The Loser Triad. The second one is called A Fair Fight in Georgia. And he says, this presidential election can go three ways. Harris wins, Trump wins, or organized mischief by Trumpists breaks the electoral system and the country. In December and January, we could see all three branches of the federal government discredited. Congress, by choosing someone who actually lost. The presidency, by uncertainty about who should hold the office. The Supreme Court, by issuing a ruling that is political. How then does the republic go on? Trump doesn't care because he doesn't care about democracy or the institution. But if it comes to powers thanks to the breakers, the system itself, the country itself can end up broken. There are actually many, many articles that talk about the different ways Trump can steal this election. I will share later some of the ones um, that I have read and I really like them. So you can read them in your own time. In summary, my personal opinion and interpretation of Acts 27 is that it'll be clear for the people in the right side of the issue to see who actually won the election. And when finally the wrong president takes office, America will be broken. I already gave the example of the years 2000 and 2001, which is the uh, when Al Gore was taken the election. Um, but I would advise any of you who are interested to review two other elections. One was the election of the year 1824, which certification took place in 25, and basically the wrong president was certified. That is the year. So this is the 2 years. Um, I will also refer you to a year that has been talked about recently by some people. 1877, which is known for the Compromise of 1877, which is the election, which is the year of the certification after the election of 1876. All these three elections are similar in different ways. So I only talked about 2001, but I would suggest that these two other elections, uh, they have something to say about how America will end up broken in 2025. One took place 200 years ago. The other one, I think, is 148 years ago, and 2001, basically 24 years ago. And finishing, I want to deal with two assumptions that I have heard from people. Someone told me that, not only one person, I have heard this several times, that we should not expect big, noisy events. To that, I replied, if someone had come to me with a message in 2020 and told me that the agitation of the Sunday law, which is 2021, would be marked by an insurrection in January 6th, that they would break into the US Capitol, chanting and threatening to hang Trump's own Vice President Mike Pence, and that they would actually stop the certification of Joe Biden, because they did. I also would have said that's too big of an event, too noisy. But now, afterwards, if that was the agitation of the Sunday law, I don't expect the Sunday law to be too different. A second assumption that I have heard that I want to deal with in closing. People have told me, how come Kamala is going to win the election? Are you saying that the American people are going to get it right? They're going to do the right thing? The Sunday law cannot be this moment when the people get it right. And to that I reply, this is the story of the sheep, the institution, and not the people. Who we should see failing in the Sunday law waymark is not the people, but the institution fails. I don't have time to talk about the groups within the sheep. It's an important thing. The people within the sheep, they are part of the institution, and they are the ones who fail. And that is why uh, the country breaks. Prophetically, of course. The United States is going to continue having elections, Congress, Senate, etc. They're going to have an opposition, very hard opposition. But we can essentially say that they broke their democracy. Um, I could stop now. I don't know if quick summary is needed. If no, I think we can go with the questions and answers later.
If you just spend 2 minutes on a summary, because we've come to the end of our time, but just spend 2 minutes summarizing the important points.
Okay. So, oh, sorry, I'm not hearing the voices. Just a second. I hear you, but not English. Can somebody repeat what was said? Sorry.
Just do a quick 2 minute summary.
Oh, 2 minute summary. Okay. Um, a 2 minute summary would be the following. I believe Acts 27 is the primary testimony to be used in order to understand the subject and the timing of the Sunday. As I already said, the Sunday law is represented by shipwreck, that we know. And there is plenty of, in my opinion, plenty of evidence in Acts 27 that point us to where it's going to happen. And what are going to be the controversies around it. I want to remind you that Caesarea is Boston, sorry, which is the same of Lasea on the line below. I want to argue this is Concord, 2001. Then Exeter, and the shut door. I'm not able to pinpoint what Exeter could be here because there's no Exeter after an Exeter. That is part of another story. I think we should try to study that and arrive to a conclusion about it. But my focus is on the line of the ship. So finishing up, I believe the sheep there's evidence that the ship is still anchored. And if the anchors were when the presidency of Biden was certified, when they're taken up in verse 40, just before Sunday law, it has to be when the presidency ends. I don't know the timing of every detail, but I would say that Sunday law, it's around the 20th of January. But as I said before, I cannot repeat it. They lost the boat in verse 30, which is what sentenced the ship, finally. If I was asked, I would say that if Sunday law is not only a point but a period, this would be the period. So that's it. Let's have a word of prayer. Okay. Dear God, we thank you for the opportunity of living in this period of Earth history. You know, it is a great responsibility. And we know that you are requiring from us that we learn how to arrive to consensus. May we only arrive to what you want us to see. May we understand what is your truth only. So I ask you all these things in the name of Jesus.